Our first panel discussion is going to be on the digital single market and how that is essential for a vibrant tech and innovation scene. While we get set up, I will tell you a bit about what we're going to discuss. We're going to try and cover as much ground as possible because one would think the digital single market, digital and the internet and so on being without barriers, it should be a no-brainer. It should be the one area where we can have a single market, but so often I'm hearing it's not. So we're going to look at some of the barriers. We're going to look at some of the areas where consolidation could happen. Specifically, we will talk a bit about connectivity and telecoms. We'll also look at the industrial policy measures that might be available, including things like subsidies under the EU Chips Act. So a lot to get through in the next hour. So I think if we are ready, yes, I can invite our three excellent speakers to join me on stage, please. Georg Riekeles, Associate Director and Head of Europe's Political Economy Programme at the EPC. Renate Nikolay, Deputy Director General in DG Connect at the European Commission. And Marc Vancoppenolle, Vice President of Nokia. Please come and grab a seat. Sit under here. Yeah. We will have our, yes, name tags above us. Thank you all very much. Let me start, Renate, with you, giving your very brief assessment of the current landscape and what more could be achieved. I'm going to ask each of you to say what you think we're at so that we know where we're all starting point that we're talking from.
Thank you very much. Well, I think what we are at is that, on the one hand, we have heard also in the previous kind of, discussion that we have a lot to be proud of what we have achieved in the 30 years to create a single market. But it's also very clear that, and we heard that from the previous speaker, we need a new momentum. We need a kind of a Delors moment or a vision for the future. And I think that can, lead us to a couple of things. First of all, I think there is untapped potential. That's why we have rolled out a white paper yesterday. This is one of the areas where we heard it from both speakers before, where we de facto do not have a single market. We have 27 compartmentalized markets, and that is becoming a real kind of burden for competitiveness. And it's very clear that we expect both the Letta report and the Draghi reports to point to that direction. But there are other areas. We heard the Capital Market Union as one of the issues that need to be looked at as well. We also, I think, in the context of the new vision for the single market, need to kind of take a different approach on effective implementation of the rules. We heard that we are having more and more regulation, future-oriented regulation. That's the only way to try to, in the digital field, for instance, to cover these new phenomena. But it also means that all of us have to act much more together, proactively, to make sure we implement them in the best way. There's a huge task for the Commission to kind of do that heads-on, but also this is never done only by the Commission. It has to be done in concert with the Member States. The final point I would make is that I think we have to look in a different way to how we support markets, scaling up, how we go about a real new pact on entrepreneurship in the EU. I think there are ingredients. When you look at the AI Act, for instance, the sandboxing, I think these are interesting things, but we need to help to scale up. We also need to do it less nationally. We need from the beginning to have a European vision. On some of the areas where we can be strong, if we want to scale up in the future, to immediately have public-private partnerships, bring member states together in strategic projects of common interest, but also in new kind of ideas to use our funding in that direction. So I think it's really everything from regulation to implementation, but also to new ways of building alliances that are agile enough to kind of support rapid developments for the single market.
Marc, Nokia contributed to this research, this compendium of obstacles. So give me your perspective. What are the frustrations that you're facing or that Nokia is facing?
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, for being here, and happy to provide, obviously, the digital sector's point of view here. Nokia today is a B2B technology innovation leader, so we are not in the phones. We are in B2B business towards telecom operators and towards enterprises providing digital gear. I want to start by saying, that to get Europe in a strong competitive position, that has obviously a lot to do about completing the digital single market. And as Jean-François said, we need fast action. I mean, the sense of urgency is absolutely critical here. If you look at some figures related to GDP per capita, the US is obviously ahead and growing faster than the EU. And we have obviously to be careful that that gap is not widening, because having a gap widening because of the digitalization not being at part in Europe is a risk. We have a delay in 5G networks that are being implemented in Europe. And so obviously telecoms is important for the digitalization. That is important for the competitiveness of our companies. So making sure that we are not getting more delay here is important. But Europe also needs to step up in terms of innovation. And currently, we are spending a bit less than other regions in percentage of GDP, or in sometimes, leading some technology development, although we have very strong pockets of innovation as well in Europe, and that means that obviously the carrots to support that innovation need to be there. So I think in short, I would just say that, to envision a strong future landscape, it's about having a unified market. Clearly, a unified market where more investments can flow in digital and telecom networks, and also where more innovation can take place with the appropriate support to European innovation and technology creators. And I'm obviously happy with the white paper that we saw yesterday, because I think that as well this is a very good step in the right direction. Obviously, the sense of urgency and the implementation will need to be at par, but we have a good starting base, and good that we can discuss that today on the panel as well.
Thank you. Georg, I want to get also your sense of the current landscape, and then take us forward. You've got lots of experience with EU policy making. What are the steps that we need to start taking at a policy level, before we'll come on to the implementation, to improve matters, to ensure competitiveness on a global scale?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And maybe I should start by saying that there's not much to disagree with in what Marc and Renate have just said. But I think what should be at the outset of our reflection is an extreme sense of urgency. And I think we are, as Europeans, and not of course only now linked to the digital sphere, but there are real issues, for instance, linked to cybersecurity. But as Europeans, we are in a rather brutal and precarious situation right now, where I think what we are facing are profound disruptions, tectonic shifts to the order we used to know. And what I mean by that is that, of course, fundamental assumptions are being challenged. Think of Germany decided to rely on Russia for its energy security, on China for its trade, and the US for its security. Well, the first is gone, the second is very much in doubt, and the third is the question about November 5th. But also, when I say these disruptions, we are, I think, living in an age of acceleration that we hadn't imagined. Sort of what we thought would come in the long term has become the very near term. And of course, climate change is one example, but I think also the digital shifts we are facing is very much an example of that with AI, but also other technologies such as quantum. So in this environment, there's no need for, no possibility of complacency. Of course, there are a lot of valid ideas out there, but there's a fundamental test now, and it's more than just about policy. I think it is about a transformation of Europe's political economy, of how the EU has a capacity together to act on these issues. We're facing fierce global competition, and if we're honest, we are playing catch-up across pretty much the full digital space. Pretty much also when it comes to every critical emerging technology these days. So I would say this new strategic agenda, 24-29, is in a sense a make or break moment. What I don't agree with is those who seek to oppose then for that new agenda say the need to innovate with or adopt technology with the need to regulate. I think we are in a paradigm now where we will require a lot of adoption of technology that comes from elsewhere, American technology. We will really have to need to find a capacity to boost our own innovative capacities, and happy to talk about areas such as quantum, on which we have been researching and done deep dives. But I think also, and I hope we can also discuss that, I think there is a real need for regulation ahead of using our competition policies, antitrust policies in new ways, and of course there's a huge need for enforcement. But I just don't want to sort of just to paint a dramatic picture. I think there are of course silver linings. The digital single market, yes, it's absolutely key, and I think we do have positions of strength also. If you look at the top 10 countries in the world in terms of digitalization, and of course also in terms of talents, digital talents, well, 5 of them are European. The only problem is that those 5 countries only represent roughly 15% of EU GDP. So that means that there are small islands in the European single market that manage to be leaders when it comes to these digital challenges, whereas we don't manage to pull the whole continent along. So that is, in essence, very much a digital single market test. And it comes down to skills, it comes down to investment, it comes down to many things that we need to discuss, of course. Infrastructure, telecoms, yeah.
Well, I think while you're pointing to the success stories of these islands, the fact that we're even saying islands is actually showing that there isn't a single market. It really should be all together. Renate, let me ask you about problems perhaps that smaller businesses or tech entrepreneurs face in scaling up in Europe, and whether that might come down to things like connectivity or a single market for data, and where the gaps still exist there, and what bridging those gaps might mean to the entrepreneurs who want to scale up.
Well, I think we need to be part of that kind of next digital revolution, and to have our place as a strong place for Europe in this. We heard, industrial is in the DNA of the EU. We heard there are sectors that could actually have jumps in innovation if we embrace the AI revolution for them. Then I think we need to look at what are the ingredients for that. We need access to data. That's why we need to untap the potential of the data, the access to data in the EU. And we need, of course, a super connectivity. Because you can forget about, including AI in all solutions. You can forget about the connected kind of, driving, where a constant data transmission storage will have to be realized to secure that no accident is happening. If we continue to have the white spots, because we have a low coverage of 5G and, latency issues, or if we don't have the kind of the systems for data storage, with edge computing, and so it's all interconnected. And I think we have made some good steps. If you look at the data access, I think there are potentials with the Data Act, with the data spaces, to really change a little bit the paradigm that was always, seen as the European approach to data, have a strong protection of data, which is also good, especially when it comes to personal data, but to move on from that and say, here it's about the usage of data. The usage of data in particular, industrial data for the IoT, for the connected gadgets, and make that a reality. The ingredients are there, but this is now a challenge of implementation to fill that with life, to give concrete user examples for different sectors. I mean, agriculture being one, healthcare being another one, where we can kind of, send a message of scaling up. The Data Act is a potential to really break the silos of access to data. It's a wonderful story for startups, but we have to fill it with life. Connectivity, we talked about, we need to kind of realize that in a better way. That's the idea behind the white paper, to really give this a boost. this is the start of a discussion, but we feel the urgency that we cannot stand still on that forever, but that we move that rapidly. So I think the ingredients are there. And then, if on top of that, there is a kind of, momentum of really building strong alliances, like we start to do now in the context of the AI innovation kind of, policy, to have kind of AI factories in certain areas, to really immediately send a message that we want you to kind of pilot, we want you to scale, to work together, then I think this could become an interesting story also for startups and for scaling up in Europe.
Well, I think when we look at DG Connect, for example, there are lots of great examples of what it's trying to do. For example, from a consumer side, we see the EID wallet, which is one of those great tools. Now, I know we're talking more from a business point of view today, but from a citizen point of view.
We could have a business wallet.
We could have a business wallet. Well, there we go. There's something for the next mandate.
Absolutely.
Marc, we've just mentioned where we touched on these high-capacity networks. Tell us a bit more about why we need them and what role they will play in driving innovation and how that will bring together a real digital single market.
Yeah. Perhaps before answering that question, I would just like to make a comment on the scale-up, because we have here very interesting papers by ERT and others, and Digital Europe, who is the association of the digital industry and the digitalizing industry, also signed a manifesto and brought up a paper yesterday which contains something very interesting, because it actually provided an infographic with a fictitious AI startup that is growing and taking a journey in Europe. And you see step by step, from access to capital, to testing models and trying to access data in Europe, to scaling up and wanting to sell their product to various hospitals in Europe and going through the various procurement rules. And then, also scaling up their own company, with the different labor laws, and all these things really showing the difficult steps that these type of companies have in Europe to scale up, and also obviously with recommendation on how to solve them. And then they also make a comparison with how that would happen in the US. So I would just also make some promotion for that paper, because it really explains very well, in very concrete terms, what is at stake for a startup in Europe to grow. So just as a point here, before going to your question.
Well, let me pick up on that, Marc. What is the secret sauce of the US? Is it so fabulous there, or is it we've got these rose-tinted glasses as we look across the Atlantic and think everything is perfect, or are we getting some things right here?
Not everything is perfect, and I think we heard it as well earlier this morning, that there are also obviously hurdles, but if you compare it to the hurdles that we have here, we still have a lot to go, let's say it like that.
Okay, Georg, I will come to you because I see you're scribbling rapidly and probably have reactions to what you're hearing. So what have you got to add there to what you've heard from them so far?
Well, one point is obviously the comparison with the US. I think one area where we clearly don't compare favorably is on financing for scale-up venture capital. And it's been improving over the last few years, but we're still far behind. And all our critical sectors, whether it's in clean tech or in deep tech, they are facing a form of investment wall.
Is that a single market problem?
It is a capital markets unit problem, yes. It's also a cultural problem, I would say. Let me just cite one figure, and that is, if you look at German unicorns, 10% of their capital value is held by US pension funds. So pensions, of course, there are very many other institutional investors, but just US pension funds, 10% of German unicorns. You know what the figure is for German pension funds of the same unicorns? No. 0.02, because they simply don't invest in that kind of risk, that kind of ventures in unicorns. So that is cultural. That is not only single market. And this picture is quite dramatic right now, because I agreed very much with the assessment in the previous discussion about, well, when it comes to consumer AI, we're behind the curve and we've probably lost that race, but there are other things to do in other areas of emerging technology. Industrial AI was mentioned. Quantum is another area. We have fantastic researchers, scientists, innovators in Europe, coming out of ecosystems in the Netherlands, in Austria, Germany, France, Finland, and so forth. If you look at the ecosystem of quantum innovation and startups in Europe, there's roughly 50 companies. All are exciting, many of which will fail. The situation they all face is that they go through seed funding, Series A, Series B, so funding up to 10, 15, maybe 25 million euros, and they can get that in Europe. But when they need to go into the Series Cs and beyond, when they're looking for additional scale, they don't get the money in Europe. So when they're looking for 150, 300 million euros, it's not available in Europe. And that's a market failure, but it is also a policy failure. We haven't managed to build this public-private financing infrastructure through the programs we have in the EU, through the EIB, through national promotional banks, whatever it is, the public funding that manages to pull in and crowd in private investment into those kind of activities. So if you are a cutting-edge startup, say in quantum in Europe, well, you had two choices. Either you wither, you die, or you head to the US. And this is tomorrow's technological leadership, competitiveness. It is also, by the way, a very real and tangible security question. And so this is just one element of the problem. There are other issues, infrastructure, skills, etc. But on financing, I think everybody has woken up to it. There was a promise, what was it, 18 months ago, we would have a sovereignty fund, we would have tried to develop more. To be fair, there is experimentation with different forms of tools, SKLR and other co-investment facilities, etc. But it's very, very little scale. We had a promise of a sovereignty fund. It has not happened. And so I think a big test for the agenda ahead is our capacity for strategic investment. What will the member states decide together with the Commission to do there?
I think Renate had a couple of comments.
I think you're pointing to a very important debate that we will need to have also in the context of the next Commission when you think about the next financial framework. I think this is really about looking at our funding instruments in terms of what is really, in supporting competitiveness of the future. So I think this is a really broad debate. I think some of what you said, they are cultural issues. I to some extent disagree. I think actually it's also something where we will have, and here the single market push can help. We will have to take a close look at, some of our prudential rules might be the reason why, German pension funds are not investing in these German, unicorns, but American, pension funds do. Or also the whole debate about taxonomy. I mean, that was a promise, an innovative new way of kind of unleashing kind of capital, but it's too kind of small. We have to think that bigger so that it embraces also other kind of strategic sectors. When it comes to, technological race and, who will kind of, be on top of the next technological kind of, developments. I think our story on the supercomputing is actually really a good one. It took some years, but no member state alone would have been able to create those supercomputers, which will be now so important to maybe not entirely lose the consumer AI race, but actually to be able to allow kind of, AI startups, also with the latest initiative that we had brought, to give them easy access, one-stop shop to the computing power so that they can train their kind of generative AI models. Because it would be very bad if we were, again, siloed in American, only solutions on kind of, that consumer AI. I think we experienced that in the platform economy. That's why we had to kind of come up with the DSA and the DMA to kind of put order in this. And if we can avoid that, it's important. But what you mentioned about quantum is so true. And that's why I think we have the Nobel Prize winners. We are very good at the fundamental research. But here we have to really, develop the next step to an alliance, to a partnership, to funding opportunities, because it might be a bet. We don't know yet fully, but it's an important kind of part to be involved in. And just to mention that there has been this alliance already, and if you look at the white paper, it also clearly kind of underlines the importance of quantum computing, also when it comes to the encryption solutions and the security aspects for the future.
Well, let's go to one of the areas where we hear a lot about calls for consolidation and concerns about fragmentation, and that's the telcos market. I mean, why, Renate? I'm going to let you start, and I will come to everyone. why don't we see a single market for telecoms? I mean, there's historical legacies. Will those legacies be overcome?
There were historical legacies, but frankly, it is difficult to understand why, almost 30 years after that kind of historical legacy has been dealt with, we are still kind of where we are. And I think it has to do, as we heard earlier, with some of the, fragmented regulatory, context. We really have to engage in another discussion on spectrum management. This is not about us getting the money for the auctions, at the European level. We would never go there. But it's about kind of giving legal certainty in terms of how spectrum, is organized, how it's authorized, what are the criteria. I think here a little bit of kind of a harmonized approach would really be important, because spectrum is scarce. Spectrum is a guide kind of, way for the next kind of, solutions, whether you talk 6G and whatever. So we really need to be on top of that. But there are much more. I mean, there are also kind of, security discussions that we need to continue. We have an unfinished business on issues such as data retention. There is no reason why we should not really kind of, bring this back to the European agenda as a discussion point. And last but not least, I think, a 25-year-old approach to a kind of specific regulation of a sector needs also to have, to allow itself to, to be checked whether it's still fit for purpose. Also in terms of the general approach on ex ante or ex post regulatory, approach. And I think that's what we wanted to open with the white paper. It has a lot of daring kind of ideas, but I think they are necessary if we want to capture the technological developments that are happening, especially when it comes to the edge kind of, of the networks and the core of the networks, to really kind of, open the possibilities for business models there, and not to think only in this vertical structure of the telcos that we have been looking at it in the last kind of decades, and also the security aspects that are so much more telling now compared to what they were a couple of years ago. So that's why I think this kind of holistic approach to the problem or to the issue of the need for future connectivity, which is, as I said earlier, the enabler for all the solutions that we want to be part of the next kind of IT productivity boom in Europe, are really essential, and I think we need to discuss them.
Marc, well, I think Renate has pointed to it there quite a bit about spectrum as a resource, and obviously as a resource, national interests want to say that's our resource, we want to use it as we see fit, and there are, of course, the national security elements there. But how do we make the case for better collaboration cross-border, better harmonization with things like spectrum, with connectivity, that will enhance all of the EU? I mean, make the business case for that, because that's probably one of the ways in to delivering a sort of real single market for telcos and communication.
Yeah. Now, perhaps first on the spectrum topic, because I think that's an absolutely critical one, and we are very happy, obviously, that we see it addressed in the white paper. The fact that spectrum was not harmonized, and the fact that every country did, their own thing on spectrum has actually caused a delay in 5G deployments in Europe. And we all know that because of that 5G deployment, delay, there is a delay in digitalization, which is affecting the digitalization of companies and their competitiveness. So, by the way, if you look at the situation, it's quite interesting, because the Commission asked actually for 5G allocation of bands to be finalized by end of 2020. And end of 2020, there was just one country that actually did it. It was Finland. And if you look at the situation today, there are still 30%, or there's still 30% of the spectrum that is not allocated to 5G. So, getting to this, collaboration and making sure that spectrum gets allocated in time is absolutely critical, especially if we have a look at 6G. 6G will come in 2030, and obviously we have time to solve the situation before, because if you're not solving it before, we will get just in the same situation as we are today. So, with the potential, obviously, holding our companies back in terms of competitiveness. So, from a collaboration perspective, a lot to do. I would just make another point about collaboration for standardization, because we talked about the importance of data to flow freely. On the other hand, today, data and AI are critical. They are the foot towards the industrial internet. Europe can still lead in terms of industrial internet. We heard that for the consumer internet, obviously the US got the upper hand here. But for industrial internet, Europe can still have it. But there again, collaboration is needed. We need to make sure that data is flowing freely. Between digital twins, for instance, if you do not have standards, how can you have these digital twins talk together? And then how can you make sure that data can flow from one country to the other when you have different rules for data for those countries? So, all these kind of things we need collaboration on to unlock the digital single market.
Georg, now I know you want to talk about a little bit the intersection with industrial policy and competition policy. And if I think about the telecom sector, one of the conversations that we hear a lot about is about consolidation. And obviously, the more fragmented the market, that's why we don't have, when we compare to the US, the sort of smaller number of operators delivering better results. Well, possibly better results. If you ask an American how great their telecom networks are, they don't always say it's fantastic. But Georg, I'd like to get your thoughts on what sort of policies could work for the future. We've got here a long list of obstacles. How do we implement the current policies that we have, or what new policies might be needed?
Well, those are some big questions. To start with, I must say I agree very much with what Renate and Marc said about telecoms. It is about spectrum. It is about standards. But I mean, if you think what's behind those issues, it's behind the fact that this is not going fast enough. Behind the fact that there's no Think European. Behind the fact that it's only Finland that delivers. Well, fundamentally, this is about attitudes at the level of member states about the single market. They haven't seen the single market as their treasure, as their platform to remain competitive and economically dynamic for years. But I think if that's the attitude in member states, that also comes back down to business. And I think it comes down also to then business, national business, every company has a seat somewhere, etc. Not pushing that message forcefully enough in capitals. Not saying, well, on spectrum, actually, we need to think ahead. And rather than doing this nationally, we are ready to go out on a limb and try to have European solutions. I think this sort of collective mentality of something else is needed now in Europe is yet to materialize, or at least there's been way too little of it in latter years. Then your question is about competition policy and industrial policy. And of course, we heard Executive Vice President Vestager answer earlier on whether it was competition issues that were at the root of, well, I guess the lack of dynamism and consolidation in the telecom sector. I think it would be a bold statement to say that competition policy hasn't played a role in keeping telecom companies to a large extent small and national in Europe. We have wanted to do that to keep prices low for consumers. I think maybe it's fruitless to have a discussion about the past, but I do think that there is a question now about a more open discussion on where our competition policy is going. What is a relevant market, be it in terms of competition policy, but also in terms of when it comes to regulation, if one can't push ahead with more mutual recognition again, those kind of things. The key aspects of the single market that we have sort of put on the pause since the early 2000s that we probably need to revisit again. And then when it comes to competition policy, of course, Vice President Vestager might disagree, but I do think we have fallen behind. I do think we have fallen behind on antitrust, in particular in the digital field over the past 10, 15 years or so. If you look to what is happening now in the US, there's a whole new antitrust agenda, which is about controlling those companies that have managed to constitute monopolies or semi-monopolies across the transatlantic space, and that are capturing a lot of the value, that are, of course, innovating, but not only innovating, also buying up a lot of the innovation, but are, through their monopolistic positions, are capturing a lot of the digital value. And I think this is something that we have, because of the consumer welfare standard, the way it's been applied, the kind of competition logic we've had since the early 2000s, we have been relatively prudent under the watchful eyes of Washington about going after. And this, of course, there have been pressures from US administrations, whether it was Democrat or Republican, whether it was Obama or Trump. What is new now with Biden is that they have developed a completely new agenda. The Departments of Justice, the FTC, they are going after a number of these wrongs in the market. And not only when they say there is market power, but they also say there are a number of companies, and I don't need to name them, that have, whose actions have other negative effects, be it in terms of privacy or surveillance capitalism, or in terms of what kind of habits consumers are lured into, and so on and so forth. So this is sort of my transition to the point that I don't think this regulatory agenda is over. Far from it. It's going to be, it should be a very tough one. And I think the next commission hopefully comes in with more promises and are willing to look at the fresh eyes on what needs to happen with the competition tools, some of which, in terms of, for instance, structural measures, we have never dared to use in Europe.
Marc, how can the EU promote digital inclusion to bridge that digital divide, to get the benefits to all the citizens, to ensure that they all have access to these wonderful tools that are out there? And I want to ask as well, are there any low-hanging fruit that we could still grasp and share in terms of delivering to citizens? And also, why is there low-hanging fruit still after 30 years of the single market? Shouldn't we have picked it all? Shouldn't we be reaching for the top branches, to continue the metaphor? Your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah. So obviously, digital inclusion is very important. You know, it's access to opportunity, and you know, everyone should have that. I think if you look at the situation with you know, connectivity and coverage, obviously you have places where connectivity is not there. You have, I think, especially vulnerable, the rural areas, you know, where the business case is not flying for operators. And so there is obviously a significant financial investment needed to get networks everywhere. Actually, there was a calculation that versus the you know, digital connectivity targets, the 2030 digital connectivity targets of the Commission, which says that, you know, having, you know, gigabit internet everywhere to all households, but then also 5G coverage to all populated areas, that there would be a deficit of 200 billion euros to have actually that coverage. And obviously that also includes the rural areas. I think if you look at it, obviously private investment is critical, but that needs to be you know, complemented by public funding to reach these kind of areas where the business case is not flying for operators. And so there are methods today. I mean, you have obviously, you know, the European recovery funds. If you look at those, they foresaw 195 billion for digitalization and connectivity. However, if you look at the absorption rate of that money today, it's only between 15 and 20 billion. So there is a problem here that in terms of adoption, something needs to be done. And that is obviously related to the fact that, you know, the member states are having different processes to allocate that money and to ensure that adoption of that money is being done. And so that is obviously putting, you know, that digital inclusion in danger. There are obviously also other funds in Europe. So we have, for instance, the Connecting Europe facility, and we have Digital Europe funds, etc. And there also that can help in addressing those, you know, areas that could get into issues in terms of connectivity. But there also, you know, sometimes complex processes and, you know, terms and conditions are a hindrance for having that being adopted. So I think overall there is a way to perform better, and I think, and I was happy to read in the white paper about, you know, EU taxonomy, which is a classification system for environmentally sustainable economic activities, and the idea to have connectivity included in that EU taxonomy, because today it is not. So obviously connectivity can help decarbonize sectors, and there is a logic to have connectivity included in the EU taxonomy so that we could have more easily access to green funding and green financing for telecommunication networks. So the fact that the white paper is really, putting that forward as a possibility is something very encouraging, and I think we should really go for it in order to get it implemented.
Well, you mentioned the recovery and resilience funds, and I think sometimes we forget that recovery is we're recovering from the COVID pandemic. Renate, which brings me on to what I wanted to ask you about, which was the ability of a truly digital single market to enhance healthcare by sharing of anonymized data. And I'm thinking things like the COVID pass were an example of that, how that worked.
Yeah, indeed. I think COVID anyway was a little bit of a catalyst to kind of think fresh about digital solutions. And I think the COVID certificate at the time was quite a daring kind of example. I mean, against the background of data protection being a dominating kind of theme, health data being, or in the health sector, people being oversensitive, or with regard to the data for very good reasons. And I think that unleashed also at least debates, for instance, to have something like the health data space. And I think we're seeing the finalization of it. The momentum has been kept, which I would kind of argue is a very positive kind of thing. Of course, in the end, you have to find a political compromise. But I think this has a huge potential of, first of all, facilitating access to health data for research purposes, which is nothing that is prohibited under the GDPR, but which is kind of, when you look at the implementation of the GDPR, unfortunately not implemented in the same way everywhere in the EU. So this is another kind of example of where sometimes having a directive and then having the different models of implementation in member states, it can be quite a burden. So I think to give this a boost on the basis of the health data space, but of course with the technological tools, which again were also already embedded in the GDPR, anonymization, pseudonymization, technological tools to kind of depersonalize the data so that it can be used, but can be used for advancing in research on whatever disease we talk about, I think is a very powerful thing. I think it would be really important to show that Europe can create these kind of cross-border data spaces, because of course if we untap the potential of having that data of our biggest single market and having it for research, having it for innovation, I think that could bring us forward, especially in this kind of broader issue of health sector, where we have not a bad starting point. And if you combine that again with AI, so going into the telemedicine and all the other kind of solutions that are there, for which we also need super connectivity. So again, it's all kind of interlinked. So I continue to find this a very, very forward-looking, innovative example that we must finalize in this mandate. But again, then also fill with life, so that it's not only a system that has been thought through, but then people are not using it. So again, the implementation of it and bringing the alliance together so that people are really using it for research purposes, for innovation purposes will be key.
Georg, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, not on health actually, but you asked about low-hanging fruits earlier, and that triggered a thought. So I thought if I can give you one, I would say mid-caps. I think it's one of the most critically unexplored areas of European economic policy making, mid-caps. Whenever we have an economic policy that needs to be developed or a crisis we need to respond to, what's the answer from the Commission or from the Parliament? It's SMEs. Mm-hmm. Why? Because when you speak about SMEs, you talk to the greatest numbers of businesses. Yeah. And of course, that's what politicians like doing. If they can speak to 99.9% of companies, well, they readily go for it. So I think under the pandemic, since you mentioned the pandemic, I think it was very justified in the sense to put a lot of focus on SMEs, direct commerce, right? They were shut down. They couldn't open. If you had a bakery or whatever it was, you couldn't sell. But also, we had an energy crisis. What is the response from the Commission? the response is an SME relief package. But arguably, the type of companies that are most hit in an energy crisis or with energy spikes, it's not necessarily SMEs. And I think I worked for a long time in the Commission, now in a think tank, and this SME discourse, I have nothing against SMEs, but it's been there for 20, 25 years, completely unquestioned. What we did is we banded together with the EIB, and we said we need to study this in some more detail. And we produced a study which is called Hidden Champions, which is about looking at the available data, available business data, looking at the different sizes of European companies and how they perform and how they struggled according to in delivering on Europe's transitionary challenges. So the digital, green, economic security, and so on and so forth. And in reality, what you see is that it's Europe's mid-caps that have both the biggest capacity to help us answer to those transitionary challenges, and also are meeting the biggest obstacles. But it's completely neglected at EU policy level. So in terms of, you talk about inclusion, of course, mid-caps are very important for employment and growth across the territory. They are hugely important for the green transition. They are key for our productivity gap because they are the companies that need to really start the uptake of advanced digital technologies. Because big companies, they can afford it. They are the hence leading test case for our digital ambitions. Mid-caps are critical also in terms of economic security because they are internationally oriented, but they have also supply lines coming from afar. So they are really a test case there also. So really, across it, all these key priorities we are setting for the European Union, we need to think about our mid-caps, yet we're not doing so. Just one simple figure, if you look at about Horizon funding, what type of companies does Horizon funding go to? Well, it goes to SMEs, because they have targeted measures. Then you have a huge dip when it comes to the mid-caps, and then it's the biggest companies that manage to profit. Same also for regulatory burden. Of course, you have always thresholds, so you have SMEs that are exempted, and for those, the companies that it will be the hardest to deal with the regulatory requirements, it's obviously mid-caps, but we don't talk about them. I mean, just a low-hanging fruit of what should be put high up on the EU's agenda when it comes to delivering on the green transition, but also on our digital decade, on our productivity challenges, and so on and so forth.
Okay, well, we need another conference then to talk about that. I think we'll park it for now. We are coming up to the lunch break, but I am conscious that we have a hand up in the room. Have we any other questions from the floor? Let me see the hands now so that I can allocate time appropriately. Just 2, 3. Okay, let's get microphones to you. Because if we don't get microphones, our online followers won't be able to hear you. Okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Vancoppenolle from Corporate Consult. Marc talked about the need to scale up, and he also mentioned business services because you're in the business B2B market, and business services and also the B2B market in general, I think is often very, very underestimated because everybody talks about the consumer markets in digital space in particular. And the flip side of the single market is also trade, and Renate worked also on trade. And when you look at the digital policy, the tech policy has become very geopolitical nowadays as well. And we need to pay attention that the internet remains a global internet and open internet. There's also a whole question about technical standard setting, where the EU is very much engaged, and also the US nowadays, because they recognize that this is important. But we don't know how it's going to look like under a Trump administration, and where likely the US might pull out again of international collaboration in the tech space. But in the moment, I think there's a certain element where the like-minded countries work together. So maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on that, and then also maybe also the way how you see also the collaboration between the EU and the UK on these matters, because when everybody has to move closer together nowadays.
Okay, I will let the panelists digest that. If you can pass the microphone forward just to the lady in the... No. Thank you. And I'll take all three questions together so that we can have a final round.
All right, thank you. So there is a lot about innovation, capacity, but also about integrity of data. When we are sharing data between different states, and that data has to be has to go through different layers and interfaces. How are we ensuring that that data keeps as good in the different stages in that process of sharing or distributing that data, or making that data accessible for everyone? The single market.
Thank you. And then a final question here. Yes, go ahead. Does it work? Try again. Okay.
I'm not sure. Oh yeah, now it works. Thank you. My name is Dirk. I'm a medical student, and I was impressed of Renate's health data space. It sounds that you're really spot on, trying to improve our data share, and also the technical push Marc mentioned about 6G, that we have to make sure that we're not in delay. I do acknowledge that. That's really important. But the problem with all these improvements, innovations that we want to be engaged with, is that the public seems to be wary about the safety and about if it's trustable. We have seen a lot of protest actually about 5G in Europe and about the scare of maybe there will be China's involvement in it. How can we ensure that we can guarantee and make sure that the people are in trust with this and that they are also engaged with this process, so we can assure that we can get through this innovative space without distrust and failures? Because that's the most important thing, I think, to get also democratically these policies and implemented in our society. Thank you.
Thank you. I think three good questions that somewhat interlinked. I think we were hearing here about sort of data hygiene, if you like, or data integrity through a chain, which ties into this final question regarding trust and public buy-in and security. And I think then that first question, you mentioned a possible Trump second presidency, but also interaction with the UK. So again, it comes down to questions of trust. Who would like to tackle one or all of those questions as a wrap-up first? Renate?
I'm happy to start. I think your international question is a very relevant one. When you look at what we have done in this commission on the digital side, then it was really to develop a web of digital partnerships with like-minded countries, and I think that was a wise thing to do. Of course, the TTC with the US being a very kind of important performer in this, but we also have a technical and trade council with India. We have quite good digital partnerships with Japan and Korea. I'm going in a couple of weeks to Brazil to develop more of a digital partnership there. You know, we have Singapore. So I think this is important to really try. We are having good talks with Australia to really try to have a web of digital potential partners that you can talk about, you know, future technologies such as quantum, you know, issues that are all concerning all of us, such as supply chains and semiconductors, but also the kind of the regulatory convergence, AI, and you know, also the platform rules, because of course AI, as we have heard from Madame Vestager, it's also the cooperation, the international cooperation among the allied partners that will continue to be an important factor, because generative AI, we will still see what it all leads to. So I think whilst transatlantic will remain important, and whilst I hope that regardless of the result of the presidential elections, the stability that we have created with the TTC, because it's not only the leaders, it's really also the network of all the working groups, all the different actors, that's quite a good stable kind of basis that hope can carry us through this, whoever kind of, you know, political leadership we're dealing with. When it comes to the hygiene of data, I think that's an issue that is important, but I wouldn't now see how this is, you know, I think, you know, we will depending on what the data is used for, I think that will determine kind of what quality of the data you need. But I think quality of the data is an issue. And when it comes to your question on 5G, I think there's a health debate that I think is diminishing a little bit, also because we had more and more studies coming in. I think the other point that you're making is a very relevant one on the security aspects. And I think here Europe has actually also shown that we are no longer naive, that we are actually talking about 5G and security. That's why we have developed the 5G toolbox. That's also why in the white paper yesterday we are developing a security narrative on submarine cables, why we are talking about, connectivity, for instance, regardless of whether it's satellite, terrestrial, or submarine, has to be resilient and has to be driven also by security concerns. So I think this is actually something that is gaining more and more ground also with regard to a coherent approach with member states. I think for the 5G toolbox was the most daring one, because there we deal with a lot of legacy from the past. But I think moving forward, now for instance on the satellites or the submarine cables, or 6G in the future, I think the awareness is absolutely there that we have to shield ourselves because we had acts of sabotage and we need to be better equipped for that.
Thank you. Georg, I presume you'll take the first question because I know you did want to talk about Brexit before we ran out of time, but I'm going to ask you to keep it brief in your final response.
I'll try not to talk about Brexit, but on the question on international space, I think it is a hugely relevant one, and it's part of what I wanted to hint at when I started off. And I think we will not see any form of stability there. But we will see whether it comes to technology or to trade, we will see a very confrontational environment. And we're already now, as part of the strategic rivalry between the US and China that is ratcheting up, seeing a lot of things around technology that is impacting European companies. And there are quite some critical lessons we need to draw from that. Technology is about our future prosperity and security, and it's not an open environment. This is now about vying for strategic technological positions in international value chains. And if you have a strong position, you're at the negotiation table. If you're not, you're at the mercy of others' actions. I think if you look at semiconductors, okay, we have ASML in Europe. That means that given that you have that technological position, somehow you can be in that value chain, complex international value chain discussion table. And I think it's very important for Europe through active analysis, mapping, forecasting, partnership between government and private sector to see how in different technological areas one can try to insert oneself strategically, trying to find these positions of strategic indispensability, because that is very much what the race is about. Of course, as Europeans, we can hope that this global environment sort of reaches a new equilibrium, which certainly globalization is reversed to a large extent or to some extent, but still, even if there is less globalization, you can still have open trade. But I'm not sure we can pin our hopes on that. I think we are looking at an environment where the course, if there's one thing there is bipartisan consensus on in the US, it is China. And I think what we will be looking at is an international space where, coming from the US, more and more activities that we used to think were normal vis-à-vis China will be considered unlawful. And this will affect more and more businesses. And then the final point maybe on the UK, really short then on the UK, maybe this is sort of the positive message with the single market. And that is, as regards the single market, and that is one doesn't necessarily realize what it delivers before one loses it. And the figures are very clear. From 2016 till the end of the negotiations, EU-UK trade took, I think it was a 10% hit. Okay. And since then, they've taken another 10% hit. It's not all about losing the single market, but it's a lot about the UK losing the single market, and that's why we need to treasure and build and develop the single market. You're
preaching to the choir here, I think. Yeah. Marc, I'll get you to give a final quick word.
Yeah, so two quick comments. The first one on security. As Renate said, very important. And, security, there are two aspects. There is technical security, but there is also trustworthiness. And for that, taking into account the geopolitical situation, it's increasingly important, and therefore also we obviously support the expansion of the 5G toolbox towards other technologies and making sure that it gets implemented in all the member states. Second point on standards, absolutely critical for business, and even in the difficult geopolitical situation we are in, we need to aim for global standards. And that might not always be easy, but it's the only way also for businesses to make sure that we have situations that are in a cost control mode. I mean, if you have various standards that you have to put in your products to be able to ship, depending on countries, it becomes very costly for businesses. So making sure that we can keep global standards for critical technology is absolutely important. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all of our speakers. We are going to break for lunch now. I apologize, we went a little bit over time because we started late. Do take the time to have your lunch, to network, but also to scan those QR codes and to check out the joint statement and the report there as well. We will be back here in this main auditorium at 2 o'clock for a panel discussion on a single energy market. But please, a round of applause for our first speakers.
Thank you.